Hello and welcome to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed, the podcast where you get quick, practical information about a hot topic. Looking to keep up with the rapidly changing HR landscape? MRA has got you covered. In the time it takes to make a cup of coffee, you'll gain insights on hot topics and pressing HR issues. I'm your host, Rebecca Jacobs, and we're so glad you're here. Now it's time to dive in. By now, if you have operations in Minnesota, or if you have employees who work in Minnesota, you are familiar with the Minnesota Earned Sick and Safe Time Law requirement. This was effective on January 1st. And remember, if you have an employee who works at least 80 hours in Minnesota, then they are going to accrue 1 hour of paid leave for every 30 hours that they work, which they can use for certain sick, medical, or safe leave purposes for themselves, their family. And remember, there is a broad definition of family, which even includes a person they annually designate. So today's episode is being recorded on January 11th, 2024, and all information is current as of today. We will follow up if anything changes. So as we went through this law and looked at the FAQs and considered all of the requirements, there was one challenging issue which bubbled up: the pay stub requirement. Employers must include on the earnings statement at the end of each pay period 2 additional things: the total number of sick and safe time hours accrued and available for use, and the total number of sick and safe time hours used in the pay period. So the question which was raised amongst a lot of employers was, well, what if we already have a PTO policy? What if that policy already provides at least as much paid time off as required by the Minnesota law? We know a number of employers have trended towards having more generous paid time off policies, whether it's having a combination of sick leave and vacation time, or it's all paid time off in one bucket. We're seeing a lot more generous requirements, or I'm sorry, not even requirements, but allotments. So the question which was raised was, do we still have to break out that Minnesota earned sick and safe time separately on the pay stub? Back in December, we spoke to the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry and asked that question. And the answer that we received from them on the phone was no. If you have a paid time off policy which provides at least as much paid time off as the Minnesota requirements, and it is no more restrictive than what's in the law, and I'll go over that in just a moment, then we don't have to split it out separately on the pay stub. Of course, you're going to have to tell your employees because you have to post a required notice for Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. That notice and your paid time off policy will need to inform the employees that this PTO policy is satisfying the Minnesota Earned Sick and Safe Time law. In other words, that they will be using or having an entitlement to that earned sick and safe time through the use of the PTO policy. So I'm going to quote from their FAQs, which you can find a link to that in our show notes. What ESST responsibilities does an employer have if they already provide leave? Quote, a paid time off PTO plan or other type of paid leave, including sick or vacation time, can satisfy the ESST law if the plan meets Minnesota's ESST requirements. Nothing prohibits an employer from providing more generous leave policies than the minimum required by the ESST law. It continues, the name of the employer's paid time off or other paid leave policy does not matter. It does not have to be called earned sick and safe time to meet the requirements of the law. So make sure that your policy, if you're going this route, provides as much leave as the Minnesota law and cannot be more restrictive. And what do I mean by that? Cannot be more restrictive on carryover than under the Minnesota law. Remember, the Minnesota law also says that employees do not have a requirement to find a replacement when they're absent. So your PTO policy cannot have that. You can have no more burdensome notification requirements. Remember that under the Minnesota law, you can write in your policy that you require up to 7 days notice for foreseeable absences. If an employer requires notice, it must have that written policy regarding those notice procedures and make sure that a written copy is given to employees. You cannot have any greater documentation requirements. Now, remember, under the law, the documentation is required only for absences of greater than 3 consecutive days. And if the employee is unable to secure that documentation because they can't get back to the doctor's office or it's too costly, the employer must accept a written statement from the employee.
And also, we need to make sure that something is in there that says there's no retaliation against employees for using or requesting time. If you need more information about this, check out the show notes. We have links to the Minnesota resources. We also have a link to a Minnesota League of Absence Policies on MRA's resource page. And as always, you can check out our resource center for various other resources to assist with this. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed. For this episode, be sure to reference the show notes where you can sign up to connect for more podcast updates. If you have questions, you can connect with MRA's hotline team by emailing infonow@mranet.org or calling 866-474-6854. Check out other MRA episodes on your favorite podcast platform, such as MRA's 30-Minute Thrive. And as always, make sure to follow so you don't miss out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll have another hot HR topic in 2 weeks.